I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Hey folks, welcome to another edition of Business of Story, and I got a special guest and a good friend of mine on today, Mr. John Martinson. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Park.
Now, folks, why this is going to be such a fun interview is John has a very interesting past growing up out in the East, came out to the West. He started China Mist Tea. And if you're wondering where have you come across that tea, probably in about any restaurant that you've dined in. It is a brilliant, delicious, wonderful tea. He and his partner co-founded China Mist Tea many years ago, and he's going to talk a little bit about that and the purpose-driven brand that he created in China Mist Tea. John has gone on to sell his interest in the company and is now doing some really amazing things in the circular economy, purpose-driven sustainability, and talking about purpose-driven. He and his son, Neo, are just finishing up a 6,000-mile road trip throughout the West in his brand new Tesla Model 3. And we caught him on his way back down the coast. He's sitting with his, I believe it's his cousin, at his cousin's place out in the Bay Area. And John is going to bring us up to speed on not only their excursion around the West, but what he is doing about purpose-driven brand storytelling, especially as it relates to sustainability. Yes, the big S word, sustainability, which means a lot of things to a lot of different people, or a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And today we're going to see if we can't peel back that onion a little bit, and at least from John's perspective, from growing a national corporation and into now traveling the world, talking and encouraging people in sustainability and in the circular economy. And we are just going to have a blast. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Park.
Now you're coming to us, you're sitting outside with your laptop in your lap in your cousin's garden overlooking the Golden Gate.
Yes.
Tell us about it. Take us through what are your surroundings right now?
Surrounded by a very beautiful garden, and we are overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, which is encased in fog. And it's a bit chilly out here because I'm probably in the fog. I can feel the water all around me, but it is not raining, so it must be fog.
You're chilly, and I'm sitting here in 115-degree weather. So keep talking because you're cooling me off. Just telling me about it.
Yes, it's a very beautiful area, and I'm good.
Awesome. Well, John, you and I got a chance to get acquainted through the Executive Masters for Sustainability Leadership program a couple years ago. You were one of our proud graduates. We're so honored to have had you go through the program, and I had so much fun working with you on the storytelling side and communicating your social initiatives because you are a born storyteller. So would you take our listeners back, tell them a little bit about your upbringing, how you finally got through school, and how you arrived at starting China Mist Tea.
So I was born and raised along the Hudson River, about 35 miles north of New York City, in a small town called Croton-on-Hudson. And I grew up in a family of lawyers, 14 of them. Actually,
oh my God.
It eventually
14 lawyers.
Yes. And my mother was a lawyer and also the local town justice. So I was heavily encouraged to go into law. It never interested me as a profession. Thanksgiving at my house was a discussion of Supreme Court decisions. So, and whereas I enjoyed the intellectual discussion, it just did not appeal to me as a life pursuit. Actually, I was watching a TV show one day about a guy who was an entrepreneur. It was the first time I heard the word. And I liked the lifestyle that he described. So I put that in the back of my mind and I went on with my life.
John, do you remember how he described it? Do you remember what it was about in that description that you said, hey, maybe I won't be an attorney talking about Supreme Court rulings over turkey and gravy?
So I think it was that he said that he gets to take his ideas from his mind and put them into action without anyone else telling him, no, you can't do that or something. And then he liked the lifestyle of being able to make his own time. And that's what I recall about it that enticed me in that direction. However, that wasn't the direction I took immediately. My parents insisted that I go to college after high school. I wanted to take a year off and get a job. They said, no way. And so I went to college and it was not appealing.
Where'd you go?
I went to Syracuse University.
Syracuse, okay.
Yeah. And I hated the weather and I hated the classes I was taking. It just seemed like more of high school that I did not want. And understand, I went to a small high school, all boys. And then I graduated and went to a large university with girls, which I was unprepared for.
Okay.
So,
could be a little distracting.
Yes, a little distracting and other things. And after about, I'd say 4.5 semesters or 3.5 semesters, I dropped out and I went back to the city. And just so you know, it wasn't just 14 lawyers in my family. There were 14 Ivy League lawyers in my family.
Oh, my.
So there was a lot of pressure to finish school, and I would have nothing of it at this time. I really needed to take the time off and figure out what I wanted to do.
And what year was this roughly?
That was, I dropped out in 75. So I went back to the city, went to New York City, and I got a job in the garment industry. You know, pre-computers, everything was in giant ledger books, all handwritten. And the company was just beginning to move into computers when I got my first week's paid vacation, and I went out to visit a friend from Syracuse who had moved to Arizona, moved to Phoenix. And I came out and visited him, and I looked around and I said, wow, I could live here.
What was it about Arizona that you liked? I mean, so completely different than where you grew up.
Well, it was a number of things. Actually, some of it was the sort of romance of the cowboy West, you know, from watching all those Westerns when I was a kid. And also the lifestyle. Apartment complexes had swimming pools and hot tubs and tennis courts. And, you know, it didn't snow there and it wasn't cold. And the heat actually was different from the heat I had experienced on the East Coast. It was dry and hot. And so I went back after that week's vacation. And actually, I spent 5 days with Bruce in Phoenix. And then 3 days I went out to visit my father's brother who had moved to California. And I discovered family I had not seen since I was a very small child. My father died when I was 9 years old. And, you know, I got disconnected from his family in a major way. And so I went back to New York after that vacation and met my parents. And I said to my mother and my stepdad at that point, and I said, I want to move to Arizona. My mother wasn't surprised. She thought I would like it out here. And she said, what would you do? And I said, I'll go back to school. I knew which buttons to push to get what I wanted. And so 2 weeks later, I called Bruce and I said he was looking for a roommate. And I told him that I was moving to Arizona. I'd be his roommate, and packed up everything that was important to me into my car, which was essentially my stereo and my TV, and moved out. And I went back to school. And after about 3 or 4 more semesters, I dropped out again.
You dropped out of ASU at that point?
I did. I think it was 1978 by the time I dropped out of ASU. Still couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Tried to get jobs. I couldn't get jobs because I had no marketable skills or no history of marketable skills. I worked for a couple of banks, got fired from both of them realized that I just had not found my thing yet. And it took a while. And I decided to start a business. I tried to get a job in sales. I couldn't, no one would hire me. So I started a business and it failed miserably. Yeah. And then I started another business that also failed miserably.
John, what was one of these businesses that you started or went to work for?
I started a distribution company for Martinson Coffee, which was my father's uncle's company that he had started probably back around the beginning of the century. And this was a kid who was 16 years old. He started buying green coffee beans off the pier and roasting them in his mother's oven, or so goes the story, and delivering them to restaurants. And he was a brilliant marketer. I learned a lot from his story. Just listening to his story sort of gave me the ideas that moved me into China Mist. And he was a brilliant marketer, for the most part uneducated, did not go to college.
What did he do marketing wise?
Amazing things. During the Depression, he bought a fleet of 9 Rolls Royces. They were cheap during the Depression.
Apparently so. The used Rolls Royces, huh?
And he converted them into panel trucks and delivered his coffee to restaurants. And the salespeople drove so they were sales and delivery people. And they would dress as chauffeurs and deliver the coffee to restaurants in New York. So that was one thing he did. And the company got very well known for that. He also was one of the first people to use airplanes in advertising. And he bought a city bus and converted it into put what's called a sample coffee roaster in the back. So if you've ever smelled coffee roasting, it is really a wonderful, wonderful smell. And drove it down to Wall Street during the coldest time of the year and roasted coffee in the back, and then gave away free coffee with cups with his name on it down on Wall Street in the coldest day of the year.
And this is during the Depression era?
Well, so the Rolls Royces started during the Depression era. This was probably more like the late 30s, early 40s.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
what a character. It sounds like you got not only the genes of lawyers, but you also got the genes of marketers in the coffee roasting and tea business.
Yes, his name was Joe Martinson. And supposedly, according to family lore, the name and the company lore is that this is where the cup of Joe came from.
Oh, really? The cup from Joe Martinson. And he was your uncle, you said?
He was my father's uncle.
Your father's uncle. Do you happen to have any pictures of Joe? Because if you did, I'd love to put them in the show notes.
I don't have them with me, but I have them at home.
Yeah, okay. You got to send me a shot of Joe. We'd love to put them in the show notes. So what did you learn from that, and how did that propel you forward into China Mist Tea?
Well, first of all, I went broke in the coffee business.
Oh, now wait a sec. What happened?
Well, for a lot of reasons. One, I learned the hard way that why Martinson Coffee perhaps didn't distribute their coffee west of the Continental Divide. Coffee in those days for restaurants. And again, I was selling coffee to hotels and restaurants. The packages were nitrogen flush. So they were in a plastic, like a metallic plastic bag filled with nitrogen so to protect it, to keep it from boiling. And when the boxes came over the Continental Divide, the bags burst.
Oh my God.
They had to then cut down on the amount of nitrogen they put in, lots of problems.
Yeah.
That was just one of the problems. But really, Park, if I was to be honest here, the fact that I did not go to business school, that I did not finish college, I did not know how to do cash flow planning, and that is probably what led to the demise of my company more than anything. I was good at sales. I had found that talent. My first major in college was acting, and I had that ability to sell. But I did not have the ability to run the business, the backside of the business. And around 1981, I met Dan Schweiker. Dan had a coffee store in Phoenix at 32nd and Camelback. And he had, it was a strip center that had just been built there. And Dan was roasting coffee and selling it to people, to consumers. Mm-hmm. And Dan was great at the back end of the business, but he was a terrible marketer. He'd be the first to admit it. The store had no personality. And Dan went broke and I went broke within 30 days of each other. He went broke first. And so I brought him in to sell espresso machines to my customers. This is the early days before the really big fancy Italian jobs. This was those small little Ely machines with pods. And we did that together for a while. And then Bun-O-Matic had invented the iced tea brewer. And a little history of the tea industry at the time, the big tea companies, Tetley, Lipton, Nestea, that were selling tea to restaurants were frustrated by iced tea. Iced tea was growing nationally, and the way they were brewing the tea is they were throwing, large family size or restaurant size tea bags into a container and filling it with hot water. And then the employee in the restaurant would have to, have the right temperature of water in there. They have to fish the tea bags out and dilute it with cold water. And every time they made a batch of 3 gallons, it was never consistent. And Bun-O-Matic, who had been making coffee machines probably since the days of World War II or earlier, they were making automatic coffee machines where you put a small batch of coffee in and you punch a button on the machine and it brings water in and sprinkles it over and does the right amount of water and the right temperature every time, making that perfect pot of coffee. Invented an iced tea brewer that basically made 3 gallons of iced tea in 10 minutes consistently, perfectly every time. And those tea companies, Bun brought that machine to those tea companies and said, look what we did. We solved your problem. And the tea companies at that time in that nexus had switched to instant tea. And so they were making batches of tea before. Now they were making single servings of tea, with a powdered instant tea. The tea was never very good, but it solved their problem.
So, John, this was all in like the early to mid 1980s. And prior to this, most people were just looking for hot teas and that sort of thing. But all of a sudden, this iced tea revolution started to kick in. It started to cannibalize their sales or drink into their hot tea sales. And so they felt like they had to jump on board and figure out how to turn their hot teas into iced teas. And they were just kind of doing it by hook or crook.
I think what happened, Park, is that they'd been making iced tea for a long time, but they had not made it consistently.
Okay.
And Bun solved a problem that they didn't feel needed to be solved. And in order for them to use Bun's machine, they would have to either sell it to a restaurant or provide it for free. And a little history of the coffee business is that prior to World War II, restaurants bought their own machines. But after World War II, when coffee became a lot more popular, to compete, coffee companies provided restaurants with free equipment as long as they bought their coffee. The tea companies did not want to get into this.
Yeah, so give them the camera and sell them the film like Kodak did. In this case, give them the coffee maker and then sell them the coffee.
Right, yeah, razor blades, yeah, that whole thing. And so they turned down Bun-O-Matic, and Bun looked for a secondary market. And the local Bun sales guy, a guy named Stan Skinner, called me up. I had been buying coffee machines from him, and he said, I think you could build a business around this iced tea machine. And that's what I did. I called up Dan and said, come on over and listen to this presentation and see if you want to, get with me and make iced tea. And one of the problems that both Dan and I had run into is that during the summer in Arizona, nobody drank much coffee. These were the days before Starbucks, all that stuff. And Dan and I thought, we could sell more iced tea in Arizona during the summer. I mean, a year-round beverage. That's what we were thinking when we first got into it.
What year did you found China Mist Tea?
We started China Mist in 1982.
1982, okay.
Yep. And actually, the company started in August of 82. We incorporated in September, and I did all the sales and Dan did all the office work. I was selling, and I was closing 80% of my accounts. 80% of my sales calls ended in business, which is a really...
What were you doing to be able to close that high of volume?
I was promising restaurants really good quality tea. And, our tea that we had blended up was very different from the standard at the time. And we wanted a tea that didn't have a dry, bitter aftertaste. I think it's what Lipton called, I forget what they called it. But anyway, we had a smooth aftertaste.
I mean, did restaurants know that this was a problem? I mean, they got so many other things on their menu. How did you get them to actually care about that in the selling of your tea? Because China Mist then has this point of differentiation that you don't have that bitter aftertaste. But I would imagine to a really busy restaurateur back in the early 1980s that they might go, it's all right. It seems to be selling okay. I'm really more concerned about the other aspects of my menu.
But it wasn't selling okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Because the tea was inconsistent every time. You'd have one glass, one serving of tea that was strong and one that was weak. And, a lot of complaints from the customers, and the customers wanted iced tea. So we solved the bun machine essentially solved their problem. And our tea became almost a local legend at that point, because it was consistent. It had a great flavor. It didn't have that dry aftertaste. And, we promoted it as, the gourmet fresh brewed iced tea.
And John, was it because of your tea leaves, or was it because of the way it was produced?
I think perhaps at the beginning, it was the way it was produced. Consistently, we provided the machine for free. We did service like no one else did. And let me just say that when Dan and I got into business together, both of us had been distributors for other companies. And we had experienced, sort of that negative relationship between manufacturer and distributor. And we sat down and we said, once we decided that we were going to go into, building our distribution just beyond the Phoenix market, because initially we just started selling locally, and we realized, closing 80% of your sales calls, maybe you've got something that you can take beyond. And we set up a distributor in Tucson to handle some accounts that restaurants that had chains down there, and then up in Flagstaff, and then Southern California. And before we jumped into the Southern California thing, we sat down and we put down everything we did not like about the distributor manufacturer experience that we had. And we made this long list. I think there was about 15 items on the list. And we sought to develop a company where it was a win-win between the manufacturer and the distributor. And the way we went about finding distributors is we didn't look for the large broadline distributors, the big trucks. We wanted to set a personal selling experience and a personal service experience. And the way we found distributors around the country, where we worked with Bunn to some extent, they helped us. Our distributor in Southern California was a friend of mine from one of my other businesses I was involved in. I was selling ceiling fans for a while, and he was in the outdoor furniture business. And so he became our distributor. And once we got, started to grow our distribution, there was a lot of local press. And so I got a call from a guy who was had graduated from ASU. He had a business degree. He was working for one of the large distributors, and he called us up from his honeymoon. And he said, do you have a distributor in Chicago? And I said, no. And he said, I want to be your distributor in Chicago. So I said, don't set up another distributor there. I said, finish your honeymoon, then give us a call. And he called us up, and he eventually became our distributor. He has grown way beyond our product, but he started his business just selling China Mist in Chicago. Eventually, he got into his specialized broadline business, and he's now a national company.
Wow.
Still a China Mist.
Just like everything in your life, you shun the traditional, and you go out and you found an opportunity with iced tea. created this and then put together this ragtag group of distributors that I guess you were really just going for their passion and their interest. And I would imagine, able to create a distribution system to disrupt everything you disliked about the existing distribution system.
Yes, and our system, which involved selling and servicing, we developed a service standard that no other company would do. Certainly not the broad lines. We had identified some problems in the fresh brew machine that the machine had to be cleaned every day, and I can tell you stories about how that manifested and how our system really solved some very big problems in the industry. And Alan, do you want to hear about that?
Well, you were thinking holistically in this. So you've got the right teas, you're producing a good raw product, but you're thinking all the way through to make sure that experience is as consistent and delicious as possible, not only for the customer, but also that experience for your buyer, for your restaurant, is as consistent as possible. And you guys grew then over the course of the next several decades, doing pretty well, leading up to the recession. And then, as I recall, you kind of got bit by the recession in another coffee enterprise. Is that right?
Yeah, that was something I'd set up for a nephew that didn't quite work out. But China Mist did very well through the recession. Actually, we did not lose a single distributor. Mm-hmm. Every single distributor made it through the recession without a problem. But, some of the things that we would do, for example, when Hurricane, I think it was Hugo, or the one that hit south of Miami Beach.
Yep.
Our distributor there, his warehouse got flooded, and he lost a lot of tea. And so we replaced every box of tea in his warehouse free.
Wow.
We shipped it to him, and that's the kind of relationship with a distributor that we wanted to be.
That you had to have.
We wanted to be we wanted to be the manufacturer that every distributor wanted. A distributor in Kalamazoo who had an aneurysm, which put him in the hospital, and we sent our salesman to run his business for 5 weeks until he got out of the hospital. This is the kind of relationship we wanted to build.
And that's certainly what led to the success of China Mist. And you recently sold it. You sold your interest in China Mist. And what did you learn about building that company and the relationships that you built that then started pushing you more into the sustainability world in your studies, returning back to Arizona State University to get several degrees in sustainability, and what you're doing now with that?
So I went back in 2009. I was on the board. I'd gotten very involved in the community, served on a lot of boards and commissions and such. Still no degree. And one of my professors, ended up on the board of the College of Public Programs, and the dean said, "Why don't you go back and finish your degree?" And I had really not thought of it. It had been 30 plus years, and she went out and introduced me to the dean of the. It was the School of Letters and Sciences, and they had a general studies degree program. That school is now the College of Integrated Sciences and Arts, and they offered me, a chance to pursue a general studies degree, and I decided, might as well. Yeah. I had 2 kids at that point, and I want them to go to college, so I didn't want to end up being the model for the parent that didn't. So I reenlisted in 2009, found my passion in sustainability. As one of the first courses I took was a class called History and Philosophy of Sustainability. And I had been pretty much a lifelong environmentalist. It really touched that part of me. And one of the reasons I went back is that I had started bringing my personal values into, once we had a successful company, bringing my personal values in, and coming out with organic teas and other types of teas, fair trade teas, and I found it was growing very well in the consumer markets through natural food stores, and it started to make the move into supermarkets. But for some reason, I could not sell it into hotels and restaurants. The chefs said the customers didn't care, and I needed to know how to market to that audience. And so I went back to school, started studying sustainability, so that I could maybe figure out how to, bring those products successfully to market. And then I finished my undergraduate degree in December of 2012, graduating summa cum laude, finally found something to be passionate about, and did extremely well in school. I finished that degree, and then I was interested in getting a graduate degree in sustainability, but I did not want to take the limited space from a younger student seeking for a graduate degree in sustainability. So they had been working on the executive master at that point, and I started another graduate program in creative nonfiction writing. And then the executive master became available, and I signed up for it, and then I ended up in your class. and it was transformative for me. I had really gone in there to learn sustainability to apply to China Mist, and it was so much more. The capstone that I came up with was to transform the entire supply chain. It really wasn't just solving my little sales problem.
To be clear, John, when you say capstone, it's a capstone project that you had with the rest of your fellow cohorts. You had to create a project that you would build on throughout our entire executive master's program and then be able to launch afterwards. So when you're talking capstone, it is an absolute project that you can then bring to the business world.
Right. And so I started looking at the entire supply chain at that point. So the context of sustainability, the global context, so I was really trying to do to my entire supply chain what I had created with Dan at China Mist, in that relationship between manufacturer and distributor. I wanted that same relationship between, farm to table. So essentially, a meaningful relationship with the people who grew the tea and picked the tea and processed the tea. And it was amazing. Once I discovered, or once I developed that sustainability lens from the program, I went all open hog. And
okay.
And I devised this program, which I thought, was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant. And it was really building a relationship with the manufacturer, the people who grew the tea, and in a sustainable way. And so climate change has very negatively affected the tea industry.
How so?
You wouldn't know it because, so for example, drought, and when unpredictable monsoons and more intense monsoons, and it causes a lot of problems. So, for example,
what countries are you talking about?
Well, the teas we used were grown primarily in Asia. So China, China Mist, Sri Lanka, India, Vietnam. The lower quality teas come from South America. So they're, more Argentine and Brazilian teas. But, the history of tea came from China. And so we were, wanting to do the more authentic, what we feel is the more authentic, more quality teas. And so one of those negative aspects of a more intense monsoon is that the teas that are produced during those monsoon periods are less quality for hot tea. Understand that still the vast majority of tea sold in the world is sold for hot tea. Iced tea is an American thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting to grow in other countries, but it is still, a lopsided. 80% of the tea consumed in America is consumed iced. It's the other way around in the rest of the world.
80%. That surprises me. I didn't know it was that high. 80% in America is consumed as an iced tea. So a good market to be in.
Yes. And so what I wanted to do is go work with the overstressed tea producers who were experiencing lower quality teas for hot tea, but not necessarily lower quality for iced tea. And I can't really get into the details of it because I'm still under a non-compete agreement with the company that bought China Mist. But what I did is I took this whole program, that whole
Your capstone
that I completed, the capstone for EMSL, Executive Master of Sustainability Leadership at ASU, and I checked it out with two people. One was our supplier, our broker, who worked with the plantations, and I said, okay, here's what I've devised for this industry. What do you think? And he said, no one is doing this. This is what needs to be done. If you do this, you'll be a hero to the tea plantations, to that end of the tea industry. And I said, are there any sustainable tea companies? And he said, no, not really. So there's a lot of marketing, but not a lot of really hard work. And this what I had devised pretty much was the hard work of sustainability benefiting the entire supply chain. And then I had met a gentleman at one of the EMSL events at ASU who is for 20 years the VP of Sustainability at McDonald's. Not really our market. China Mist sold primarily to mid-scale and up restaurants, not to the broad lower end of the market, meaning fast food and
right,
large national chains. And I asked him, I said, all right, I've got this capstone plan. I explained the whole thing to him. And I said, what do you think? I can always switch. It's October. I need this finished by January. And he looked at me and he said, I've been looking for something like this for 3 years and unable to find it. So if you do this, it's great. So I completed the capstone, graduated in January of 2016, brought the capstone to my business partner and the president of China Mist, who we had hired a year before. And I said, what do you think? And I explained the whole thing to them and mentioned the comments from the others. And they said, great, let's do it. And so we just started working on it. And then my business partner came to me in April and said, I want to retire. And our agreement had been that when one wants to retire, we would sell the company. So the capstone book is on my bookshelf. As far as I'm concerned, this is my work, not China Mist's work, since I paid for my degree and everything else. So it is sitting on the bookshelf for my 5-year non-compete to run out.
So I want to make a point, listeners, and maybe I don't even need to because it's self-evident. The thing about John Martinson that so impressed me in working with him as a professor and getting to know him now as a friend is his word is his word. So here he's built this very successful China Mist company with his partner, and they made an agreement several decades in advance that if any one of them wants to retire, they would sell the company. So here's John on the cusp of now this new great big adventure that is coming out of his EMSL work and his capstone project. And like the universe that always punches us in the nose just to see how badly we really want something. So what does it do? It comes back and it punches John and says, okay, guess what? Your partner wants to retire, which then invokes that verbal clause that, you know what, we got to sell the company. And to your credit, John, I am so impressed with how you are such a man of your word. And so you went on. Who did you guys sell China Mist to?
Who did we sell
who
it to?
Bought it?
Farmer Brothers Coffee. They were a coffee company, or they are a coffee company that primarily sells to hotels and restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our market. We really didn't get into consumer markets until later when our customers, the people who are buying our tea at restaurants are saying, hey, I want some of this at home. So, but primarily we were food service supplier.
So then you sold to farmers, and then you moved on. That was just within the last year or two. And you started to put together your Be the Tea company, kind of playing off of your capstone project.
Yeah, well, it really didn't. It wasn't that it played off the capstone project, I was trying to apply the sustainability lens to more of tea. But, Park, over time, I'd been in the tea business for 34 years. I finally realized that, I think a lot of people go through this. I've talked to other people, other entrepreneurs on the road, even on this trip, and they have told me that they went through a depression when they sold their company, anywhere from 6 months to a year before they figured out what they wanted to do. And, I kind of went through that. I said, well, should I stay in tea? Should I couldn't really stay in tea much because I had a 5-year non-compete with Farmer Brothers. And if I finally came to the conclusion that I could apply the sustainability lens that I acquired from ASU to other things and do what I really wanted to do. But it took me a good 6 months to a year to realize that I wanted to do something else.
Yeah, which is, I think, very natural as you've experienced on your road trip. Let's talk about your road trip. You grabbed your son, Neo, who's going to be a senior in high school this year, and you got your third Tesla, a Model 3, beautiful blue, aqua blue, I guess. I don't know what you call blue, gorgeous blue. By the way, folks, I was lucky enough.
It was a dark blue.
It was a dark blue. John was nice enough after he bought it to, show it off to me a day or so later, and I talked him into letting me jump in and taking it for a spin. What a beautiful car. But tell us just a quick backstory on why this road trip, 6,000 miles. You're just finishing it up all through the month of July, and you took off from Arizona, went up through Colorado, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, into Canada, went to some beautiful places. You're now hanging out in the Bay Area, making your way back down the coast to Phoenix again. So what was the impetus for the road trip?
Well, initially it was just to spend the time with my son. He loves to drive. I love to drive. And he goes to school, all day long pretty much because he's in an after school program learning aircraft maintenance technology. And my sense was that he was working too hard and needed some time off. And I really wanted to spend time with him, some quality time with him. And then I applied the lens of sustainability to our trip. And I thought it would be, an opportunity to talk about sustainability and clean energy to an audience, that gives me an opportunity to teach people about driving an electric car, which is, zero emissions. And, this is all in an effort to mitigate climate change. And I figured, I may not be able to do it on the very high level, but I can do it with a reasonably small audience or medium-sized audience that, it gives me a chance to do my part. I don't need to have a huge part in it. I just need to, do what I can.
And you spent some quality time with Neo. You've got a blog, teslaroadtrip.blog, so that you all have been posting. You've got a great Instagram account. You're on Facebook. So it's been fun following your grand adventures. You even got the Rocky Mountain Institute involved in your trip. So this went beyond just a father and son road trip for the month of July, but you really started incorporating some of the big thinkers in sustainability into your program.
Yes. So I actually reached out to a couple of professors at ASU in sustainability that are specific to sustainability. So to Bruno Sarda, who is also one of my executive master professors.
The vice president of sustainability at NRG, as well as one of the professors at in EMSL.
Right. And Bruno's been very influential to me in my sustainability journey. And also Paul Hurt, who taught me that first course. He took that. He was the professor of history of sustainability in my original class, History and Philosophy of Sustainability. And Paul and I became very good friends, very close friends, and reached out to them and said, "What kind of organization, if I were to donate this our trip and give it a higher purpose?" The idea here was to give the trip a higher purpose, and for doing things that I was, or promoting things that I was very passionate about. And I think it was Bruno who said, tie this to your sustainability story. And I went back in my history of sustainability and of my own personal history in sustainability. And it was that I had read a book called Natural Capitalism that affected me a lot. It was back in the late 1990s. And it was co-written by Paul Hawken and Amory Lovins and L. Hunter Lovins. And Amory, the work that he does in Rocky Mountain Institute, where he's the chief scientist and chair and founder, is the kind of sustainability I think that I like to see. It is working with companies, entrepreneurs, governments. They work, nationally and internationally, and they work towards, a low carbon future. And they're what you call a think and do tank. And I'm very impressed by the work that they do. And so I reached out to their director of development and said, sent her an email and said, I know this is not the way you normally probably raise awareness about your organization or fundraise or whatever, but I sort of outlined what I wanted to do and make them the primary benefactor. So normally people do events like this, and they look for sponsors. What I was doing is being the sponsor and reaching out to an organization that I could help. And I heard right back from her. She was very interested in what we were doing. She put me in touch with two other people in their company, in their organization that I've been working with. They designed the wrap that is on the car. And that's the only thing I've asked of them, really, is they provided the design of the wrap. I've done everything else, made the investments. All my time is donated to them.
There's the Joe Martinson in you see. So there's that salesman marketer. The Joe Martinson is playing out in your road trip with Neo up throughout the West.
Something, Park, one of the really exciting things for me about this trip, besides spending a wonderful time with my son and teaching him about sustainability and teaching him about electric cars and such, has been the writing. And I've always liked to write. The graduate program in creative nonfiction writing, even though I didn't finish it, I did learn a lot about blogging and writing. And I've discovered that I really love to write. And what I've tried to do is every place we go on the trip to find something about sustainability that ties into that place that I can write about. So, for example, we hit, when we were on the early part of our trip, we went to Durango, Colorado, where they had a very bad fire, a forest fire. And I was able to write about or blog about the effect of climate change on forests and how that is making forest fires worse. So things like that.
Yeah. What has been your biggest surprise on this trip?
That's probably my biggest surprise, is how much I really love writing.
Yeah, well, and storytelling. Yeah. So, here you get a chance to apply your storytelling talents you got out of EMSL, which you're very, very good at, to your blog at teslaroadtrip.blog. John, we got to wrap up here because I know I got to get you.
Can I tell you one more
Absolutely.
thing?
Go for it.
All right. So what I've decided is at the end of this trip, I am going to put together about 5 presentations using my EMSL learning, and for 5 different audiences. And we're going to do a white paper and a complete report on the trip. I'm probably going to bring in a couple of grad students to help me. I want to extrapolate out the route we took with other electric vehicles that are available on the market, and see, show people considering buying those cars, that you really can go on a long, aggressive road trip.
Did Tesla get behind your trip?
Not officially, no. But the idea here is to do presentations to a variety of audiences. So middle school students, high school students, college students, business groups, chambers of commerce, homeowners associations who could put in, solar solar panels in there and the infrastructure for charging. So I have figured out now what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's really to promote clean energy, renewable energy, sustainability, and electric automobiles.
That is awesome. I mean, you've got this purpose-driven brand in your purpose-driven drive across the West with your son, Neo, and you've opened up this whole new chapter for yourself. And really, it's not a total pivot from what you're doing. I mean, you grew up through China Mist Tea. You learned how to do all that with a great product, the great distribution, that sustaining those relationships, and then finding through your work at ASU how to build sustainability into all you do, selling off your company, wondering, what's next? So this is really just a natural step in the direction that shares your greatest passion or your greatest curiosity. And that's everything you talked about with renewable energy and just helping do your small part to impact as many people as possible in the world of sustainability.
I have to say one thing, Park, and I hate to do this as a plug, but it is, I will not be able to do this last part that I want to do, the presentations and everything, if it weren't for you.
Oh,
what I have learned from you and what I continue to learn from you about storytelling will help me prosecute this final piece of the trip. And there may be other trips.
Well, I'm honored that you would say that, and I love the fact that you use the word to prosecute, because that just is going back to your roots from the 14 lawyers that surrounded you at the Thanksgiving table, and you can't shake it, but you're using that strength to help the world become a better place. And I am proud and honored to be a part of it, and I'm so proud of the work you have done. And your road trip with Neo, I think, is just exemplary, especially when it speaks to fathers out there. They're saying this is the kind of time that's important to spend with our kids in important causes. And it's not just to sit around and chat and have a good time, but you guys are on a mission, and that's pretty doggone cool.
I don't play golf and I don't fish. I've got to do something and I don't call it retirement, Park. I pivoted.
John, you'll never retire. You've got too much tea caffeine in your veins. You are not going to retire. You are a force, and a force for good, and it's just so great to know you. How can people learn more about what you're about? You know, we've mentioned teslaroadtrip.blog several times. Go there and you can capture John's entire route, what he has been writing about, and I'm sure you'll be adding some more to it. Where else can people go to learn about what you're going to be doing?
Well, I think that's probably the best place right now. You know, you can go to the China Mist website, and I still have some blogs left on there if you want to look at that. But primarily, this is what I'm doing now.
Well, John, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy road trip schedule to be with us on Business of Story. And like you, I was attracted to the desert Southwest because of the Western lore. I read Louis L'Amour, and that's what brought me down. So all I can say for you is happy trails ahead for you and Neil. You know, have a safe trip back to Phoenix this week. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Park.
And thank you all for listening to this really extraordinary edition road trip of the Business of Story with John Martinson, his son Neo, on their Tesla road trip around the West, and learning more about China Mist, where it went, and how you too can be a positive impactor, a positive prosecutor, if you will, of change in the world through your purpose-driven brand. And if I can help you do that, to help you become a more powerful communicator, to clarify your story, to amplify your impact, and simplify your life, please visit me over at businessofstory.com. And if you liked what you hear today with John, share this with a friend. Share this with a tea lover. Share this with someone who's interested in sustainability. And by all means, if you have an interest in furthering your own education in sustainability and want to learn more about the Executive Masters for Sustainability Leadership Program, reach out to me, reach out to John, or we can put you in contact with the right people down at ASU. It's a marvelous program. You get a chance to work with leaders around the world like John to really, again, amplify your impact and simplify your life in sustainability. So thank you for listening. I'm here for you at businessofstory.com. And until next week, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.